The evening rain drummed against the windows of Marino's Bistro as Lieutenant Commander Vera Castellanos pushed through the heavy oak door, shaking droplets from her civilian jacket. The warm amber lighting and gentle hum of conversation welcomed her inside, a stark contrast to the military precision that had defined her last 18 months overseas. She had chosen this place deliberately, drawn by its reputation for quiet corners and excellent seafood, exactly what she needed after 3 weeks of debriefings and readjustment interviews. The hostess, a young woman with kind eyes, led her to a small table near the back wall. Perfect positioning, Vera noted automatically, clear sight lines to both exits and the main dining area. Old habits from combat zones died hard, even in suburban restaurants. She ordered a glass of Pinot Grigio and the evening special, settling in her chair with the first genuine moment of relaxation she had felt since returning stateside. At a large round table across the dining room, 3 men in expensive suits dominated the space with their loud laughter and gestures. The tallest one, broad-shouldered with silver threading through his dark hair, seemed to be holding court while his companions hung on his every word. Their voices carried easily across the restaurant, punctuated by the clink of glasses and occasional burst of raucous amusement that caused other diners to glance their way with mild irritation. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar acts of quiet strength in your own community. Vera sipped her wine slowly, savoring the crisp notes while her salmon arrived perfectly prepared. The familiar routine of cutting her food into precise portions helped ground her in the civilian moment, though her peripheral vision never stopped cataloging the room's occupants. An elderly couple shared dessert near the window. A business dinner unfolded at the bar, and those 3 men continued their increasingly boisterous celebration. The silver-haired leader raised his glass high, his voice cutting through the restaurant's ambience. Marcus Brennan. She heard him introduce himself to a passing server who clearly wanted to escape the interaction. His companions, a stocky redhead named Tony and a thin man with nervous energy called Rick, seemed content to follow his lead in all things. Their conversation had shifted from business victories to more personal conquests, each story growing more embellished and crude. Other diners began requesting different tables or asking for their checks early, the uncomfortable energy radiating outward like ripples from a disturbed pond. Vera watched the hostess apologetically reseat a young family further from the disruption, her jaw tightening slightly at the unnecessary chaos. When Marcus's gaze began wandering around the restaurant, cataloging the other patrons with the predatory assessment she recognized from her time in conflict zones, Vera felt her posture subtly shift. The relaxed civilian facade remained intact, but underneath, 18 months of combat readiness quietly stirred to life. She took another measured bite of salmon, her breathing controlled and steady, while her mind automatically began calculating distances and exit strategies. The transformation was invisible to casual observers, but Marcus had noticed the solitary woman at the back table. Marcus nudged Tony with his elbow, nodding toward Vera's table with the subtle aggression of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Look at that one," he said, his voice dropping to what he probably considered a conspiratorial whisper, but still carried clearly across the dining room. All alone, trying to look so serious with her little business dinner for one. Tony chuckled, the sound grating against the restaurant's refined atmosphere. "Maybe she needs some company," he suggested, already pushing back from his chair. Rick shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing, his loyalty to Marcus overriding his obvious discomfort with the direction their evening was taking. Vera continued eating methodically, but her awareness had sharpened to combat levels. Every sound, every movement in her peripheral vision registered with crystalline clarity. The elderly couple was settling their bill. The business dinner had moved to after-dinner drinks, and the waitstaff had begun giving the 3 men's table a wider berth. When Marcus stood, straightening his expensive tie with deliberate slowness, Vera's hand moved almost imperceptibly to rest beside her water glass. To any observer, it appeared natural, relaxed even. In reality, Her fingers had positioned themselves for maximum leverage and striking capability, muscle memory from countless training drills activating without conscious thought. The restaurant's ambient noise seemed to dim as Marcus began walking toward her table, his companions trailing behind like eager predators following an alpha. Other diners sensed the shift in energy, conversations faltering as an undercurrent of tension rippled through the room. Vera took another sip of wine, her expression remaining perfectly composed while every instinct honed through years of military service prepared for what was coming next. Marcus arrived at her table with the swagger of a man who had never been truly challenged, his cologne overwhelming the delicate aroma of her meal. "Mind if we join you, sweetheart?" he said without waiting for an answer, already pulling out the chair across from her. Tony positioned himself to her left, while Rick hovered uncertainly near the wall, blocking any casual exit toward the restrooms. "I'm actually enjoying a quiet dinner alone," Vera replied evenly, her voice carrying the kind of controlled politeness that should have warned any perceptive person to retreat. "Thank you for the offer, but I prefer to keep it that way." She returned to her salmon with deliberate calm, hoping they would take the clear dismissal and return to their own table. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows invading her personal space across the small table. "Come on now, don't be antisocial. We're just being friendly. You look like you could use some company, sitting here all by yourself like some sad little businesswoman." His tone carried that particular brand of condescension that treated refusal as merely an opening negotiation rather than a firm boundary. The server approached hesitantly, clearly sensing the uncomfortable dynamic, but unsure how to intervene without creating a scene. "Everything okay here?" she asked, her young voice wavering slightly. Marcus waved her away dismissively without even looking up. "We're fine, just getting acquainted with our new friend here." Vera's grip on her fork had subtly adjusted, though her eating motions remained natural and unhurried. Around them, other diners pretended not to notice the brewing confrontation, their conversations growing artificially louder to mask their obvious discomfort with the situation unfolding in their midst. Tony's chair scraped against the floor as he moved closer, his breath already heavy with alcohol when he leaned toward Vera's ear. "You know what I think," he said with crude confidence. "I think you're playing hard to get. Most women would be grateful for attention from successful guys like us." His hand moved toward her shoulder, fingers already reaching for unwelcome contact. Vera's posture remained deceptively relaxed, even as every muscle fiber prepared for action. "I've asked you politely to leave me alone," she said, her voice carrying a new edge that cut through Tony's alcoholic haze. "I suggest you return to your table and let me finish my dinner in peace." The words held an authority that made Rick take an instinctive step backward, though Marcus seemed oblivious to the warning. Marcus laughed, the sound harsh and grating in the suddenly quiet restaurant. "Listen to her, boys. She thinks she's giving orders." His eyes narrowed as he studied her face, searching for signs of intimidation that simply weren't there. "Maybe you need to learn some manners about how to treat gentlemen who are trying to show you a good time." The elderly couple had abandoned their dessert entirely, leaving cash on their table and hurrying toward the exit with worried glances over their shoulders. The business dinner had gone silent, executives pretending to study their phones while obviously listening to every word. Even the kitchen staff had begun gathering near the service window, sensing trouble brewing in their normally peaceful establishment. Vera set down her fork with deliberate precision, her hands now free and positioned for maximum effectiveness. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable to anyone with combat experience, her civilian facade beginning to crack as military training asserted itself. The restaurant manager, a nervous man in his 50s named Gerald, finally approached with hesitant steps and wringing hands. "Gentlemen, perhaps we could move this conversation to the bar area," he suggested weakly, his voice betraying his inexperience with actual confrontation. "We have other guests trying to enjoy their evening meals." Marcus turned on him with predatory speed, his face flushing with anger at the interruption. "Mind your own business, old man. We're just having a friendly chat with the lady here. Unless you want us to take our considerable business elsewhere, I suggest you walk away and let adults handle adult conversations. The threat was clear and effective, Gerald retreating with mumbled apologies. Tony's hand finally made contact with Vera's shoulder, his fingers squeezing with possessive familiarity that made her skin crawl. "There we go. Much better when you're not being so uptight," he said with alcohol-fueled confidence. "Why don't you come back to our table and let us buy you some real drinks instead of that fancy wine?" The touch triggered something deeper than training, deeper than tactical awareness. Vera's entire body language shifted in an instant, civilian softness replaced by the coiled readiness of a predator. Her shoulder rolled away from Tony's grip with fluid precision, while her other hand moved to brace against the table edge. The movement appeared natural, almost casual, but positioned her for devastating leverage. Rick finally found his voice, though it came out as an uncertain whisper. "Maybe we should just head back to our table, guys." She doesn't seem interested. His survival instincts were finally overriding peer pressure, but Marcus was too far gone in his need to dominate to listen to reason or retreat from what he perceived as a challenge to his authority. Marcus reached across the table to grab Vera's wrist, his fingers closing around her delicate bones with bruising force. "You're coming with us, sweetheart," he declared with the absolute certainty of a man who had never faced real consequences. "We're going to show you how to have some actual fun instead of sitting here playing Ice Queen." The moment his grip tightened, something fundamental shifted in the restaurant's atmosphere. Vera's eyes went flat and cold, the warmth completely draining from her expression as 18 months of combat deployment crystallized into perfect focus. Her breathing remained controlled, but every person within sight could sense the deadly stillness that had replaced her civilian composure. Tony tried to slide his arm around her waist from the side, emboldened by Marcus's aggressive lead. "Come on, baby, don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said with crude confidence. "We just want to party with you. Maybe take you somewhere more private where we can really get acquainted." His words carried implications that made several nearby diners reach for their phones. The last threads of Vera's patience finally snapped. In a voice that carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death command decisions, she spoke with crystalline clarity. "Release me immediately and step away from this table. This is your final warning." The words cut through the restaurant noise like a blade, causing conversations to halt mid-sentence throughout the dining room. Marcus tightened his grip instead, his ego unable to process that a woman might actually pose a threat to his dominance. Rick backed away further, his survival instincts screaming warnings that his companions were too drunk and arrogant to hear. The entire restaurant held its breath, sensing that whatever happened next would change everything. What happened next defied every expectation in the room. Vera's free hand moved with surgical precision, her fingers finding the pressure point just below Marcus's wrist with the accuracy of someone who had studied human anatomy for combat purposes. The grip that had seemed so dominant moments before became a liability as nerve clusters screamed in sudden agony, forcing his fingers to release involuntarily. Marcus stumbled backward with a gasp of shock and pain, his face contorting as he stared at his suddenly useless hand. "What the hell did you just do to me?" he snarled, though his voice now carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Tony froze mid-reach, his arms still extended toward her waist, but no longer moving forward. Vera rose from her chair with fluid grace that spoke of countless hours of hand-to-hand combat training. Her movement was economical, controlled, and absolutely terrifying in its casual efficiency. Every person in the restaurant could see that she was no longer the same woman who had been quietly eating salmon just minutes before. The transformation was complete and undeniable. Where a seemingly ordinary civilian had been sitting moments ago, now stood someone who moved with the predatory confidence of a professional warrior. Her stance was balanced, her hands positioned for maximum effectiveness, and her eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had ended lives when necessary. Tony tried to grab her arm as she stood, his alcohol-impaired reflexes making him forget the demonstration he had just witnessed. The attempt proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation that would haunt him for years to come, though he wouldn't remain conscious long enough to fully appreciate his mistake. Tony's reaching hand never completed its journey. Vera intercepted his arm with a move that belonged in special operations training manuals, redirecting his momentum while applying leverage that sent him crashing into the adjacent table with bone-jarring impact. The collision scattered glassware and silverware in a symphony of destruction that echoed through the stunned restaurant. Marcus shook his numbed hand desperately, trying to restore feeling while his mind struggled to process what was happening. "You crazy bitch," he screamed, his voice cracking with rage and dawning fear. "Do you have any idea who we are? We'll have you arrested for assault." His threats sounded hollow, even to his own ears, as he backed away from her controlled advance. Rick had already retreated to the safety of the bar area, his earlier instincts proving remarkably accurate. The remaining diners pressed themselves against walls and into corners, phones appearing to record what everyone now realized was about to become legendary. The kitchen staff clustered in the service window, watching with a fascination reserved for witnessing history in making. Vera moved with the fluid precision of water flowing downhill, each step calculated and purposeful. Her hands remained loose at her sides, but everyone present could sense the coiled violence ready to unleash at a moment's notice. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect in the most dangerous places on Earth. "I am Lieutenant Commander Vera Castellanos, United States Navy," she announced with quiet dignity that cut through the chaos like a sword. "You have exactly 3 seconds to apologize and leave this restaurant before I demonstrate why the Navy trusted me with classified combat assignments." The countdown had begun. Marcus made the fatal error of charging forward instead of retreating, his ego unable to accept defeat from someone he still saw as just a woman. His rushing attack met 18 months of elite military training in a collision that lasted exactly 2 seconds. Vera sidestepped with minimal effort, her hand finding his throat with precision that cut off both air and sound while her foot swept his legs from underneath him. He hit the restaurant floor with devastating finality, gasping for breath while his vision swam with stars. Tony attempted to rise from the wreckage of the neighboring table, only to find Vera's boot planted firmly on his chest, pinning him in place with the kind of pressure that made breathing an effort rather than an automatic function. The demonstration was over before most witnesses fully understood what they had seen. 3 grown men, each outweighing her significantly, had been neutralized with the casual efficiency of someone swatting flies. No wasted motion, no unnecessary violence, just the precise application of force required to end the threat completely. Gerald, the manager, stood frozen behind the bar, his mouth hanging open as he stared at the aftermath. The kitchen staff had gone completely silent, their faces pressed against the service window in awe. Several diners were openly recording with their phones, capturing footage that would go viral within hours of being posted. Vera straightened her civilian jacket with the same calm precision she had used to dismantle her attackers. Her breathing remained controlled, her expression returning to the composed politeness she had worn throughout dinner. The transformation back to civilian mode was as complete and unsettling as her earlier shift to warrior, leaving everyone wondering which version represented her true nature. The police arrived within minutes, their radios crackling with reports of an altercation at Marino's Bistro. Officer Patricia Hensley entered first, her hand instinctively moving toward her weapon until she assessed the scene and realized the threat had already been thoroughly contained. 3 men lay groaning on the floor, while a composed woman in business attire stood calmly beside her table. "Lieutenant Commander," Officer Hensley said with immediate recognition and respect after seeing Vera's military bearing and hearing witness accounts. She had served 2 tours herself before joining the police force and could identify elite training from across a room. "I assume these gentlemen initiated the confrontation without understanding who they were dealing with." Vera nodded quietly, her posture remaining relaxed but alert. "They refused multiple requests to leave me alone and escalated to physical assault," she reported with the clinical precision of someone accustomed to after-action briefings. I used minimum necessary force to neutralize the threat to myself and other patrons. Multiple witnesses can verify their aggressive behavior and unwelcome advances. Marcus struggled to his feet, his earlier arrogance replaced by desperate pleading. She attacked us for no reason. He wheezed through his bruised throat. We were just trying to be friendly, and she went crazy. His companions nodded weakly from their positions on the floor, though their injuries told a different story than their words. The restaurant had transformed completely from the tense, uncomfortable atmosphere of minutes before. Other diners looked at Vera with newfound respect and admiration, several approaching to thank her for handling a situation that had made everyone feel unsafe. The elderly couple had returned, drawn by curiosity and relief that justice had been served. Gerald approached with newfound reverence, his earlier nervousness replaced by genuine gratitude and embarrassment over his initial failure to protect his customers. "Lieutenant Commander, your meal is absolutely on the house tonight," he said with deep sincerity. "I apologize for not intervening sooner, and I want you to know you'll always be welcome here. Your service to our country deserves better treatment than what you experienced this evening." The three men were escorted out in handcuffs, their earlier swagger completely deflated as they faced charges for assault and harassment. Marcus kept looking back over his shoulder, his expression a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect for someone who had outmatched him so completely. Rick actually nodded apologetically as he passed, his survival instincts finally proving correct about the danger they had created. Vera returned to her table and calmly finished her salmon, though the wine had grown warm during the confrontation. Other diners continued approaching throughout the evening, sharing stories of their own military family members and expressing gratitude for her service. The atmosphere had completely transformed from tension to celebration, with strangers becoming temporary friends, united by witnessing something extraordinary. As she prepared to leave, Vera left a generous tip for her server who had tried to help earlier. The young woman thanked her repeatedly, clearly inspired by seeing someone stand up to harassment with such decisive effectiveness. The kitchen staff lined up to shake her hand, their faces glowing with admiration for someone who had turned their workplace from a scene of intimidation into a place of triumph. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment or character, or tell us about someone you know who showed hidden strength when it mattered most.